Hi, everybody. How you doing? Better than ever. That's the best one I've ever heard. Thank you very much. I wish I could say the same, but it wouldn't be true. But it's an aspiration. My name is Aidan Flax-Clark. I'm the director of Live from NYPL. I am very thrilled that you're all here. I'm very thrilled to everyone who's joining us online. Tonight we are very lucky to celebrate a special book and to learn from his friends and family about one of the most influential yet unheralded heroes of the civil rights era, Reverend James Lawson Jr. Reverend Lawson died at the age of 95 in 2024, and this week, today actually, his posthumous memoir is being published. Hopefully you all saw it outside. Tonight, his son, John Lawson, and his memoir co-author, Emily Yellin, are here to talk about Reverend Lawson's life and work and this incredible book. If you are anything like me, you will be grabbed right away by Eddie Glaude's inspiring preface, and then when you start reading Reverend Lawson's riveting opening, you will know that this is a really special book. So I would urge you, if you're able, to pick up a copy outside while you're here. I believe that Emily will be signing copies of the book afterward. And if you aren't able to pick up a copy, I'm sure you have a library card. You would be, as I always say, you would be an insane person to come here without a library card. And I will find you if you don't have one. But if you do, you can get the book with your library card. Reverend Lawson's lifelong commitment to nonviolence was a defining influence on Martin Luther King, to whom he was an advisor, as well as to the countless activists he trained in nonviolent direct action centered in love and moral clarity, such as the Little Rock Nine, the Mississippi Freedom Summer Volunteers, and many, many others. Even if members of the executive branch don't remember it, it is still Black History Month, so we are very honored to help share a bit. Maybe they will remember one day. But we are honored to share Reverend Lawson's book during this time, but frankly, what has been called a powerful reminder that moral clarity can improve the world, feels like a very welcome guidepost and source of inspiration, and a reminder of good that is possible in this world, even when moral clarity may seem to be at a particular ebb. Emily and John are going to speak with Emmy Award-winning journalist Michelle Miller, who until recently was the co-host of CBS Saturday Morning and whose work was featured across CBS News for more than 2 decades. You may have seen when you signed up that Tremaine Lee was originally scheduled to handle interviewing duties. Tremaine unfortunately got sick and couldn't make it. We were very honored that he agreed to join us, and we are now also incredibly grateful to Michelle for jumping in at the last minute. A quick plug, speaking of Black History Month, and then I will leave the stage, but hopefully you know that our friends at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, where they like to say every month is Black History Month, yes, right, are in the middle of celebrating their centennial year right now. In 1925, the New York Public Library opened the Division of Negro Literature, History, and Prints, which was the forerunner to today's Schomburg Center. It began as a special collection of the 135th Street Library, but the division blossomed the following year when they purchased the personal collection of Arturo Alfonso Schomburg, who was a distinguished Puerto Rican-born Black scholar and bibliophile. Schomburg had spent decades collecting books, manuscripts, and art that illustrated Black contributions to global history, and now his collection is the seed of what has become a national landmark and a world-renowned research center located in the heart of Harlem. The Schomburg Center today stewards a collection of 11 million items, and it is dedicated to the collection, preservation, and exhibition of Black history and culture, and it may have a couple of items related to the history of the Civil Rights Movement. It is quite a place, and they've had excellent programming. They have a great exhibition, so I really encourage you to go check it out. The Centennial exhibition is up for a few more months, and there's still great programming that you can go to, so you can discover all of it at nypl.org/Schomburg. Lastly, there will be time for questions at the end. You got some note cards in your programs. Please write down your questions during the talk. Some of my colleagues will come by and collect them. And then also, if you're watching online, you can put your question in the chat. We're glad to hear from you wherever you are. Live from NYPL is made possible by the continuing generosity of Celeste Bartos, Manaz Isbahani Bartos, and Adam Bartos, and of course by all of you here. So thank you very much for your support. Thank you very much for being here, and let's please welcome Michelle Miller, Emily Yellin, and John Lawson.
Hi, folks. How you doing? First of all, let's give a big applause for these two here. Ems and John. I'm a last-minute addition, as you heard. I want to give a shout-out to Tremaine. I hope she, gets a speedy recovery. But, there's order in this moment. There is order in this moment. And I have to acknowledge that because, I got the call yesterday. There's order in this moment, not just because last night, Dr. Lawson's contemporary, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, passed away, who was also present on that fateful day in 1968. But I want to acknowledge to John in gratitude for this is a full circle moment for me, very emotional one. I'm a native Angelino, and it was your dad that counseled and consoled and cared for me and my family as he presided over the funeral of a fellow civil rights activist, Dr. Ross Miller, who was my father. So, indeed, there are no accidents. I was meant to be here. No accident either that I happened to stumble across Ta-Nehisi Coates' documentary, Our Howard Bison alum, Between the World and Me, another book based on the struggle and the lens of appreciation of strategy that, your father was so instrumental in bearing. So with that, and Emily, I want to include you in this, I think of the power dynamic that is now in control of this nation. And I'm just going to put it right out there. That fully embraces the legacy of white supremacy. Why your father's story matters in this moment, and how you see it as a primer for us moving through it.
I would say that my father, besides being a great husband, a great father, a great preacher, pastor, that he was a man of moral character and moral clarity. And that early on, he was taking me to marches when I was 6 years of age because he wanted to show me what it was like to be a black man in America who stood up for dignity, stood for injustice in the world, and what it was like to use the moral force of nonviolence and soul force to change a system and change a structure. And that's why I find now his story and his words to be such an important time as of now.
His story has truly been embraced by those who've read this book. I unfortunately must let you know I didn't get a chance to read the book in
It's
full.
only 600 pages.
It's only 600 pages.
Right.
But Emily, I know that, the making of the memoir is a lot like the making of sausage. It ain't easy. But you helped in that grind. And you helped because you're an ally, but you're also family to this family. Part of the Holman family is my bestie in high school used to call it. That was her home church.
Right.
So how did this come about? How did you find and seek out this story as a 600-page memoir?
Yeah. Well, it's a long story, and I'm going to be short no matter
and
how
you wrote
long
about it.
I'm going to be short no matter how long it takes. John and I were in elementary school together in Memphis. I've known Reverend Lawson since I was 5 years old.
Wow.
And our parents were friends, and they were both in the movement together in Memphis. And in 1968, we were in first grade when the sanitation strike happened in Memphis. Reverend Lawson and his wife used to come to our home. So there's a long family connection, but then I'm also a journalist. And years later, I lived in LA. And when the Rodney King verdict came down, I was living in LA, and I was in a parking lot the day after the main looting happened, and I heard Reverend Lawson's voice on the radio, and I hadn't heard it since 6th grade when they moved away to LA. And I felt, he said, this reminds me of the day after Martin Luther King was killed in Memphis. And I just felt like he was talking directly to me. And then I moved back home to Memphis. I'm actually originally from New York, but I moved home to Memphis. And in 1995, James Earl Ray was trying to get a new trial. And Reverend Lawson was working with the King family. And I was writing for the New York Times about the South. And I ended up reporting on Reverend Lawson, and I was interviewing him, and I'm sort of feeling like this is like my first grade a parent in my first grade class, and I'm the New York Times. And so that was an interesting thing, but he officiated at James Earl Ray's funeral, and I covered that for the Times in Nashville. So that's another sort of connection. And then in 2018, in the 50th anniversary of the sanitation strike and the assassination, I produced a 10-part series for The Root, a video series called 1,300 Men. And if you don't know, those are the men who went on strike, the sanitation workers in Memphis. There were 1,300 men, black men, who walked out. And that was it ended up becoming, in Memphis, an example of the beloved community. Because like in Montgomery, when the bus boycott happened, the black community rallied around. And I say that because white people did not rally around. And that's what is such a beautiful part of this story, because nonviolence, the ultimate expression of nonviolence is the beloved community. The ultimate expression of violence is war. And so it's sort of like, which one are you going to choose, right?
You seem to choose one over the
right,
other quite a bit.
Right. And so then I interviewed Reverend Lawson for that project. And then in 2020, when the pandemic happened, I was thinking, what do I do? And he and I were talking. And I said, have you ever thought about writing your memoir? And he says, my family has wanted me to do this forever. And I said,
well, he came back to us at a family meal and said, Emily Yellin has volunteered to help me write my memoir. And what do you think? And we all said yes, finally. But most importantly, it was my mother, Dorothy Lawson, who gave the approval that Emily Yellin should work with him in writing down his words, his story. And really, without Mom's approval, it wouldn't have gotten done. But
of course not.
Yeah, but we're so pleased with the work that Emily did, working with him, interviewing him, coming out to visit in LA, and doing the research. And it was really a work of love.
yeah.
So many stories come out of memoirs no one's ever heard of, because you dig deep, right? You go deep. Yeah. And one of the stories, I never heard of it, but this story of when your dad was 4 years old. And he sounds a lot like my husband. At a young age, didn't know anything about nonviolence.
Right.
Someone called him a racial slur, and he reacted a certain way. The why of that, and how did that shape the arc of his life?
Well, I would say, he would say that experience.
You have to tell him what it is. I was saying
Okay,
that for you.
all right. He was living in Ohio, and he was one of 12 brothers and sisters. All the sisters came first, the sons came second. And he was the oldest of the sons. And my grandmother, Big Mama.
I had a Big Mama too.
Okay. Philaine Culver Lawson.
From Jamaica.
Yeah, from Jamaica. She sent him on an errand. And that day you could send a 4-year-old on an errand. And on the way, a little boy was sitting in the car and called him the N-word. And his response was to go up to that car and slap that kid. And so it was that experience, and then going home and thinking about that moment is what caused him to start to believe that there's got to be a different way.
At 4?
Yeah, well, he
At 4.
he told his mother about it, and she said, "Jimmy, what good did that do?" And he couldn't answer. And this kind of happened a couple of times, and then when he was 12, she said, "There has to be a better way." And he spent the rest of his life finding that better way.
I tell you the power of his conviction, because you flash forward to when he was drafted for, was it the Vietnam War?
No, it was the Korean War.
It was the Korean War.
Korean War.
The Korean War. He was drafted and he refused the draft.
Actually, he refused to do the selective service.
Right, because he thought it was
Right.
racist. And so he said, "I'm not going to participate in a racist system." He could have been a conscientious objector as a minister and get that deferral or whatever it is. And he decided not to because he was standing up to that. And actually his example, one of his examples for that was Bayard Rustin, who did that in World War II. And he ended up getting arrested and going to prison because they wanted to make him an example.
Of course.
And we found what was so amazing was his papers are at Vanderbilt University, which is a whole nother story. But in the papers were his prison diaries. And so the chapter about prison is written from a 22-year-old's perspective mostly. We took his prison diaries and made it into the chapter with a little bit of narration. And one of the most incredible parts of that is there's this letter that he wrote to a friend. And he says, in 1951, he says, I don't understand why there can't be a movement in the South where black people, he said Negroes at the time, rise up against segregation in a nonviolent way. And I think there has to be a charismatic leader. And I feel like I'm going to be part of this. Wow. In 1951. And he was saying that and saying that and saying that.
While in prison.
Yeah.
While in prison. I mean,
in federal prison, the same prison that Bayard Rustin was in.
Yeah, that's keeping hope alive. I mean, in many ways.
Right.
He was inspired by Gandhi in India. I mean, how did he make that connect? And then also the leap of describing nonviolence as a science, the art and strategy of nonviolence.
Well, I think, his belief system started at an early age when he felt that spiritual guide to say there has to be a better way. And at that point, at that young age, he said, I'm not going to use violence anymore. I'm going to look for a different way. And his going to prison was an example of, I am not willing to kill for this country, but I am willing to die for this country. And because he went to prison, the United Methodist Church supported him and told prison officials, if you parole him early, we'll send him out of the country. And so he became a missionary in India and went to India as a missionary, as a coach. So he coached soccer. And while there in India, he began to study how is it that Gandhi was able to shake the power of the British empire.
In the first month he was there, he met with people who, just sort of by chance, but not, he met with people who had worked with Gandhi, and he met Nehru, who was the first leader.
Wow.
Yeah, and I mean, that was just, he was there. And the other part of that, which we both really like, is that after that, he spent 3 years in India, but he wanted to go to Africa. And that was in the mid-50s, and the independence movements were all starting. And so through the church and other connections he had, he ended up meeting with leaders of the African resistance in Kenya, in many places. He met Patrice Lumumba, who the CIA killed later. He met other people who were in that movement, but they hadn't done it yet. So there he is, seeing what they're doing, and they were inspired because they didn't feel that enough Negroes, I'm saying the word that he did, again, because yeah.
Context.
Yes, please. That they didn't pay enough attention to Africa and feel that connection. So he was the connection and inspired many people there as well.
There's something, in a system where in all oppressive societies or all oppressive regimes, turning the other cheek, so to speak, is seen as weakness. And especially with young people. I remember when I went to Howard University, and I learned, like, all the things we don't know, we never learn in school about our people, about Black folk, about resistance, about and innovation, and all the things that we created in this country and outside of this country. And I was angry, right? Because how could someone deny me this knowledge? And I went to my dad and I asked him, I was like, has anyone ever in your seeking out an education and bettering your life called you the N-word? And he said, of course, of course. And I said, what did you do, Daddy? He said, I did absolutely nothing. So how did he convince young folks to be like my father? Because my dad said, I had a plan. I had a strategy. I wanted to be a doctor, a surgeon. That was...
Well, you'll see, I mean, he met with a lot of young African-American men, especially, who were angry during this period of time of being denied, seeing white-only signs. And he would engage with those people to say, it's okay to be angry. It's okay to be enraged. But you have to use that anger, use that rage to tear down the system.
But this is after months and months and months of
So I have an example.
strategy sessions and learned behavior.
He worked with the Little Rock Nine in 1958, and he went there, and they had been told, don't fight back. And that made him very angry. And he said, no, you have to fight back. You have to fight back, because if you don't fight back, it's going to do something to your spirit. It will have effects on your life forever. And so what he was doing was teaching them nonviolent ways of creatively fighting back.
Like?
Well, there's a story where there's a story where he teaches one of the there's a this is a long story, so I'm not sure I want to go there, but there are stories in the book about this. So.
Gotta save some for the reader.
Yeah, sorry about that.
But it's important to understand what fighting back looks like in a nonviolent prism. Can you give me just an example? When all the stuff we see of folks in the black and white footage, what were they doing that was resistance, but yet nonviolent?
It was, well, for my father, nonviolent resistance was a force equal to violence. And his philosophy in studying nonviolence was that nonviolence helps to change structures, but it also builds community. Violence destroys, tear down, but it does not build community. It does not build a more positive society. And the only way to fight against those forces is using the sole force of nonviolence, of love, to break down the system and create a different system that creates a more just world, that alleviates poverty, that alleviates racism. So that's what nonviolence and the tool of nonviolence does.
I'll give you an example of Nashville as a campaign, because nonviolence is not one thing.
Right.
It is a strategy. It's a series of it's a process. So there are steps, right? The first step in Nashville, it took a year before they did the sit-ins. You think, oh, the sit-ins just happened because somebody wanted a cup of coffee. That's not what happened. What happened is they saw the signs, and they decided that Nashville was going to be the next campaign after Montgomery. And so they went to the people of Nashville who were experiencing segregation, and they sat down for 6 months. They met. These were leaders like Reverend Lawson, and they met with people who had to shop downtown, women in particular. And Reverend Lawson would say the women of Nashville are what started the sit-ins, because they told them that when we go, we have to go and we buy shoes and we have to take them home, try them on. If they don't fit, we ride the bus back, the stories. And so they decided that what they were going to do was target department stores. And then the next step, they recruited students. There were 4 black universities in Nashville, and so they recruited students, and that's how
TSU.
Yeah, and that's how John Lewis got involved.
Is that why Nashville was so different from other cities? Because of that concentration of universities, black HBCUs?
Well, what Reverend Lawson would say, it's why it was a good place to do this, because they were trying to find a place in the South that would have the elements they needed to do a successful campaign. And then, after a year of study, they went and tested to make sure there was, they wouldn't get a cup of coffee if they sat down, and then they did the sit-ins. So it's a long process. It's not just a march. You don't march and go home, and say, okay, we're done. It was a sustained thing. Montgomery took 13 months.
And Nashville, though, got a biracial committee. I mean, it was a good faith moment.
It was, but that wasn't enough. They had to keep going. They actually paused when they got this biracial committee so that white people and black people could talk. But they paused and they realized, no, we have to keep going because this isn't helping. And then they got the signs taken down. They desegregated the first American city.
But the next step was we also want to expand in hiring.
Right.
You should have some black employees, cashiers, people selling in the store. The next step was moving on to the theaters. So it wasn't just the sit-ins to desegregate the lunch counters. They expanded the movement in Nashville to include hiring. So there you have the economic aspect, and then move on to theaters. And it continued.
Another example of nonviolent direct action, is what it was called, is the Freedom Ride. Okay? You're testing this law that was in place that said interstate travel could not be segregated, and so they tested it, and they took blows, for that. But they went to jail, and they flooded the jails, and that was a tactic. It was, we're gonna just keep sending people until they can't arrest us. They don't have any room in the jail anymore. And so those are the kinds of creative and imaginative tactics. It's complex. That's why I think it's hard to sum it up in one sentence, right? But it's really, what he would always say is that you don't want to imitate the way of your oppressor. And nonviolence is a way to fight back without imitating your oppressor.
John Lewis, Diane Nash, Dr. King, all of these extraordinary leaders. What was it that they were so attracted by in your dad?
I think it was his moral clarity, his sincerity, his consistency. Remember that Martin Luther King and James Lawson Jr. were the same age. They were both young ministers that clearly could have gone to a college institution or a theological school and led that for many years without being involved. And so they were like-minded in terms of the moral clarity of ending segregation, ending racism in this country, and that they could not, this country was not living up to its creed. My father thought that the Declaration of Independence and the United States Constitution were sacred documents, in his words. But he also believed that this country was not living up to those sacred documents.
So, Civil Rights Act of 64, Voting Rights Act,
Yep.
65, Nobel Peace Prize for Dr. King. And then a lot of people don't distinguish it this way, but the war in Vietnam really pushed civil rights to the side. The message started to expand. Economics really became part of the mantra. And your dad was, fighting the good fight. I mean, I shadow to say it. What was it he was hoping Dr. King would do? Because, explain it. Dr. King's moment wasn't, the Dr. King of 68 was not the Dr. King of 63.
Riverside Church?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, if I may, okay, Reverend Lawson and Dr. King had many talks about Vietnam, and Dr. King was fully aligned with being against the war in the way that Reverend Lawson was. But they chose strategically not to have him come out and do that because, in 65, let's say. And so there was a peace trip to Vietnam, and Dr. King was invited to come. It was ministers from around the world, including the man who wrote the poem we all know, First They Came for the, okay? And Dr. King called Reverend Lawson and said, look, I can't go, so I'm going to suggest you go. So he was sent in Dr. King's stead, and he went to Vietnam in 1965 during the war on a peace mission. And, he's telling me this, and we're talking, and I knew this because I had done some research, and then all of a sudden he goes, oh, yeah, and I spent an afternoon with Thich Nhat Hanh. And I was like, what? And so there's this amazing story where he brought Martin Luther King's greetings, and Thich Nhat Hanh is one of the main Buddhist leaders in that movement and became a luminary. But he met him before Dr. King did, and then they met a year later and became aligned. And they chose when it was time for him to come out, and that was 1967, the Riverside Church speech. And it was exactly a year before he died. And he had talked with Reverend Lawson a lot about that because they were so aligned in their commitment to nonviolence, more so than a lot of other people in the movement.
What was it that you recall your dad? And there's so many questions around Memphis, and I don't want to take anything away from the book because folks have to buy the book. But the question of set the scene for Memphis, April 3rd, 1968. Was anyone thinking this is dangerous territory here? Was that feeling, was it a verboten of that moment?
My father sat me down at an early age. My mother and father said that, my life is threatened. I'm going to have death threats. I'm going to have people following me. And so I could be killed. So at age 5, age 6, my parents sat me down and said, this is a dangerous time. And so we want you to know what your father is doing, why he's out there. And at the same time, at age 6, I'm going to rallies and marches with my father. My mother takes me on that last march with Dr. Martin Luther King before the looting takes out and the police tear it, shut it down. So in that environment, I felt safe and secure. I felt that this was the right thing to do. I was happy being with my father out there with signs, marching around, and so it was a sense of pride for me. But it was a dangerous time. Me reading this book kind of tells me how really dangerous it was. And at a 6-year-old, how naive a 6-year-old can be with all the kind of threats and dangers that are going on during that period of time. And so that's one of the things that astonishes me when I read his words, how dangerous it really was and how much under threat he was during that time.
Was there ever any guilt about having asked him to go to Memphis?
No.
No.
Never. I mean, the discussions among all the leadership, the Lewises, the Nashes, the Martin Luther Kings, the James Lawsons, the James Bevels, they've all felt under threat.
Reverend Lawson said, I didn't think I was going to make it to 40.
Yep.
He made it to 95.
Yeah. So, I mean, for all these men in the movement and women in the movement, the threat and the fear of death or injury was constant.
There was also a threat of segregation and racism. So
the terror of the
right.
times.
It was a
Yes.
time of white terrorism, much like some of what we see today. And Reverend Lawson understood that, and as John said, he was willing to die for his country. He wasn't willing to kill.
You know, 1968, April 4th, devastating to the communities around the country. And RFK delivered the news to many people where he was that night. And then 2 months later, he died. My father was the first physician to get to RFK in Los Angeles. I'm sure, like my father, there was a great deal of heartache, personally having known him and been campaigning with Dr. King. How did he, watching him, get through that? And why did part of like sort of his healing process include thinking about moving to the West Coast?
No, moving to
No?
the West Coast was not part of that.
That was the church.
That night, I remember my mother crying uncontrollably, my father crying a little bit, and then my father went out, and he was gone all night into the next day. And because he was out there on the radio and TV stations, walking the streets trying to get people, let's not use violence to express our hurt and our pain. So he did not take a moment to really grieve. For him, this was all part of the calling, and that you have to keep going with the calling, which was to change the face of this country. And so no grieving. Grieving, yes, but you got to keep going.
When you read the book, you will see 1968 is a whole section. It's 6 chapters. And there's one chapter that's just April 3rd and 4th, and we were able to piece it together and do almost an hour-by-hour account. And we have the transcripts of all of the radio shows he went to, and we put those together. And so you can actually see what he's saying in that moment. And he went, the minute he heard, now I want to say something about your father.
Well, that was a great teaser, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. He made a deal with Mrs. Lawson that he would come home at 6 o'clock every night and have dinner with his family. And
Brilliant.
the assassination happened at 6:05. And so everybody else was at the balcony. He was home with his family.
Wow.
And he heard it on TV. And, you know, as you said, your mother got very upset. He said, I'm going, and he went to WDIA, which was the first black radio station, one of the first black radio stations in the country. And he said he went there and he recorded something because they didn't know he had died yet. So he said, let's just stay calm, you know, we don't know. And then while he was there, the news came over the wire, as it used to, in the radio station that he had died. And so he made another recording and said the same thing, but now we have to be calm. And then he went to all the TV stations. He got the police to escort him and Ben Hooks, who later on became head of the NAACP. And the two of them went to TV stations, in the 3 TV stations in the city. And then they ended up at the lobby of the Peabody Hotel in Memphis, and somebody interviewed him for 45 minutes.
Wow.
And it's all in the book.
I don't want long stories to go long because we don't have much time, because there's a whole other life this man lived on the West Coast, to have had the career and experiences and mission that he had in the South, and then to move to the West Coast and find, guess what? They got the same problems in LA, La La Land, that they have in the Deep South. I mean, they burned, like, I'm from the South Central Los Angeles, so I was in the midst of all the burning during '92. My dad was the first black city councilman in Compton, burned a cross on his lawn in '61, I believe. So I get it. So what drew him in the 70s to Los Angeles in particular? We were terrified of Daryl Gates. Terrified. My grandmother said, do not go up to a police officer by any means necessary. So that's kind of like what I grew up with.
Right.
So here your dad, what was he thinking? Holman had
Holman was
set it up for
Holman
him.
United Methodist
Yes,
Church
yes.
in
I'm sorry,
Los
we
Angeles.
just called it Holman for
the
short.
largest United Methodist Church in Los Angeles. He was called there by Bishop Golden to come out there to a new church, and he thought that his work in the South had been done, and he felt this is a new experience. So we moved out there, and of course, he immediately sees there was redlining going on. There was racism in terms of how people were treated, and the police department was well known for brutalizing people of color. And he saw that and knew that that immediately was his first step in terms of tackling that type of racism. So Chief Darrell Gates was the nemesis that my father had in terms of how he was using police dogs to bite people who were handcuffed. And so he eventually ended up in a lawsuit challenging those tactics by LAPD.
Lawson versus Gates.
Yeah. And this was the police chief who was the chief of police in Los Angeles, but lived an hour away in the very tip of southern tip of Orange County. It was either San Clemente.
San Clemente.
Yeah, sure was. I'll never forget
And
that.
Darrell Gates developed what the SWAT units.
Yeah.
So
He
you
created
see,
SWAT.
He created SWAT. So all the local police departments started following. We need a tank too. And so
That and Dare.
Yeah, and that and Dare. And so he was infamous in that, but he did not recognize the type of brutality that his department was creating for people of color.
I think it's really important to point out that Reverend Lawson used nonviolence from age 4 all the way through his life till the day before he died. And he took the same tactics from the civil rights movement and applied them for 56 more years, right? And that after King was assassinated. And they were the same age. So I like to think that he was doing what King would have done had he lived. And it's a great way to see his life.
Yeah, he truly segued into bringing nonviolence, or the strategy of nonviolence, into the labor union and labor organizing movement and those campaigns. What was it he saw that they needed?
He saw labor unions after the Memphis Sanitation Strike. Memphis Sanitation Strike is when the labor movement and the civil rights movement came together. And he didn't really believe in labor unions before that because they didn't address black people's problems. And so he then was in LA, and he worked with janitors, he worked with maids, he worked with people who were in service jobs, and brought them into he was part of bringing them into the labor movement. And he trained them the same way he trained Diane Nash and John Lewis, and they did very creative, protests, and that's really what he did there. And then he also worked with undocumented students. He taught at UCLA for 25 years, and he taught undocumented students in the undocumented student movement. He had taught many of those students nonviolent direct action. Tell them about the day before he died.
My father, 95, and he was ill. But he was watching some of the protests that were going on college campuses.
In 2024.
In 2024, and he told me, I need to hurry up and get out of this bed because I need to start a new student-led movement for nonviolence and help to teach these students how to be creative in tackling this oppression. So at age 95, he was still looking for ways where he could use that creative talent of nonviolence and continue to be a teacher of next generation of freedom fighters.
He gave us all our charge.
Oh, wow. I have to ask about some pivotal moments in our recent history. His thoughts quickly on the election of Barack Obama.
A wonderful thing, but only just the beginning. It helped to, it was symbolic, but it was still the underlying oppression and violence of this country was still going. He would continuously say, the United States of America is the greatest proliferator of violence in the world.
He called it the most violent country in the history of the world. We dropped the atomic bomb. We have more guns than humans in this country.
Right. And the better gauge of how great a country is looking at your infant immortality rate.
Your infant
And
mortality.
yeah, and so when you have such high rates in Mississippi and Alabama, you need to take another look at what your priorities are as a country.
He called that the barometer of a healthy society, is looking at how the infant mortality rate, and poverty rates.
And the movement, you say that, was he you say the 2024 student protests, and I'm curious, the moments of 2020 that seem to sort of usher in this allyship and I was just like so happy, and amidst so much tragedy and so much grief, but there was such hope in 2020 through people coming together and seeing the pain of others. What were his thoughts?
Oh, clearly he thought, again, signs of oppression, signs of violence. He considered poverty violence. He considered economic depression or keeping down a group of people based on poverty, violence, racism as violence. And so whenever he saw that, he thought the best way to fight that type of violence is, again, using soul force to combat that, because you're building community and not necessarily tearing down community with violence.
I think he would look at somewhere like what's happening in Minnesota, where there was a story about the protesters going to the hotel where ICE was staying and singing to them about how you don't have to do this. And he would see that as creative ways of nonviolently demonstrating against violence.
Yeah, he is truly needed now. Some notes, questions from the audience. Capping off of my first question, what actions today do you want to ask readers to take to move toward the goal of equality?
First of all, we should not be surprised by some of the state-sponsored violence that is going on in our country. This is not new. And so we, as people of goodwill who have moral conscience, continue to need to organize and get together and learn to push back against that state-sponsored violence. And I think that's part of the message that he brings in this book, is that arc towards justice, towards equality is long. It is not an end point. It is a journey.
And you're not too old or too young to join in creating that and moving forward. And I think, one thing I took from working with him, I asked this question just from being with him for so long, and now I use it. What would love do? In any situation, especially a situation of conflict, what would love do? And he said, nonviolence is confrontation. It's not passive. It is confrontation, but it's not confrontation where you destroy and dominate. It's confrontation where you expose an injustice and look it in the eye and make it, make people see what it is and do the right thing.
What is the greatest misunderstanding or about the era we call the civil rights movement?
He didn't use the term civil rights movement. He didn't like that term. He called it the Rosa Parks Martin Luther King movement. And I said, Reverend Lawson, that's really long. John Lewis called it the nonviolent movement of America, and he said Reverend Lawson was the architect of the nonviolent movement of America.
The chief strategist.
The chief strategist. But he felt civil rights for him was sort of more legal. But he said there's also how you act, what you do, and the effects. And so I think he felt, correct me, but
Human rights.
yeah, it was an incomplete term for him.
Someone asked, what did your dad think of the Black Panther Party?
He thought of the Black Panther Party like he thought of anybody young people who were angry and thought that violence was a way. And what he would point out is that violence versus violence does not create community. And that you can be angry and be a Black Panther, but you're not going to be able to outshoot, out-militarize the United States war machine. And so you have to begin to use other creative strategies beyond just using violence. He never shunned young people who wanted to use violence because he felt that they were all working towards the same goal, which is equality and justice and to get rid of segregation in this country. But it was about trying to bring those into the fold of how to show them that there's other creative ways to tear down an unjust system.
But surely he applauded their efforts with school lunch with lunch program. These people started what later became adopted by the United States of America, feeding the country's poor. So I just want to point that out. And a number of other really progressive, fundamental, help their community.
He said they were in the same fight. And so he never, it was sort of this outside idea that there was this huge split. He said Stokely Carmichael, who his name then, they were friends. They'd known each other. They would laugh together. We have a picture in the book with Reverend Lawson in the front, Martin Luther King and Stokely Carmichael, and they're laughing because we wanted to show it wasn't
real people.
Yeah, and it wasn't all and they had disagreements, but any movement you have disagreements, and that was what he would always say. And he said, I never spoke out publicly against them. He was not a pull up your pants, and act right. That's not what nonviolence is.
Speaking of which, how would he describe, here we are posthumously asking him to, or at least this is me asking this, but what...
You're not the first.
Yeah, but posthumously, I would be remiss if I didn't ask, how would he eulogize the Reverend Jesse Jackson in this moment?
Another mentee. I knew Jesse Jackson. In fact, through my father, of course. And at one point in my former life as a public defender in Los Angeles, I was able to get Jesse Jackson to come speak as part of a forum on criminal justice and what we could do to change the criminal justice system in Los Angeles. He would rightly say that James Lawson was his teacher. And so you'll see there's plenty of pictures of the two of them together. It is a loss for the country because he is, again, an example of a lion of our country who stood up and stood out against injustice in this country, not only in terms of the segregation, but also talking about the economic issues that sometimes our politicians refuse to talk about.
Folks want to know about the process of writing this book and the collaboration. How many people did you actually interview for 600 pages here?
Reverend Lawson.
Just one?
One.
You've never, no, I interviewed Mrs. Lawson. I talked to John and his brother Morris a lot. I talked to Seema, I talked to Raven, John's wife, and Reverend Lawson's granddaughter. Yeah.
Is that it?
No, and so let me tell you. Reverend Lawson, when you ask him a question, you get an answer. A full answer.
Thorough.
Yeah. No, so my father, actually, my mother and father did an archival project, or an oral history in Memphis in 1968. They were both journalists, and they saw that the sanitation strike wasn't being covered correctly. My father interviewed Reverend Lawson 11 times between 1968 and 1972. I had those transcripts. They're in an archive in Memphis. I used those. I used, other documents we found, and I talked to him from 2022 through 2024, really, 100 times.
Order in our steps. Order in our steps. For you, John, were there surprises in this book, stories that you didn't know? Or a story you're going to share, because the rest of them are in there.
Yes. Reading about his time in prison is mind-blowing. I'm a attorney, criminal defense attorney. Did that for 20 years. I've been a judge now for almost 17 years. Jail and prison is an inhuman place. I've visited many a jail and many a prison. And to read his words about this place is going to make me stronger. This place is going to help me to study, to learn, so that when I come out of here, I am going to be able to tackle the racism and injustice in this land. It also gave him the opportunity to learn that men are men. And so the people that he met in prison, at one point they kept him in a place where murderers and robbers were, the toughest of the toughest. And there he met someone by the name of Liberty, who he saw as being a human being. And at that point he recognized that even if people do something wrong or considered criminal, they are still human beings, and that he's going to treat all people with dignity and with respect. And that is very mind-blowing to me. How could a man at age 19, 20, 21, 22 know what he is going to do for the rest of his life and be on that mission? That is mind-blowing to me.
I have to tell you the forgiveness too, because there were so many slights. Being thrown in prison for standing up for his beliefs, you know, being denied or kicked out of divinity school, and then later, you know, Vanderbilt saying, "Okay, we're sorry." The process of being recognized after years of maltreatment. How did that come across for him? How did he process that?
I'll take that one. All right. He didn't do it for being recognized or not recognized. He knew what he was doing all along. And so I think he saw the prison, he saw Vanderbilt that kicked him out because he organized the Nashville sit-ins, and he was one of the first black students there. He saw it all as exposing racism. He didn't see it as a personal affront to himself. One of the things that was so amazing about him is his sense of self. And if we talk about Jesse Jackson, I am somebody, right? That was one of his, that was something that Dr. King, Reverend Lawson, everybody was trying to instill, because there's a through line from liberty to I am a man. And Reverend Lawson felt that, knew that, and brought that to the movement as part of nonviolent direct action.
Yeah.
Emily, I think Liberty is perhaps one of these people, but one of our audience members has asked, were there younger activists from today and the movements of today that inspired, and to you too, John, Reverend Lawson?
The Black Lives Matter inspired him. It inspired him because it was a new group of activists who said, this killing of this man that we all saw on video is unjust and is wrong. And the organization of speaking out during a pandemic, he admired that courage. And so he saw that as the next generation of people who are going to be activists against the injustice in this country.
I'm going to bring up two Tennessee men, Justin Jones and Justin Pearson, who were part of the Tennessee Three.
Yep.
They inspired him. They stood up to a Republican governor who was, I could go on. Reverend Lawson said, this governor and our current president have a hole down the middle of their soul.
Mm. Did he leave this earth with hope?
The day before he died.
Yeah.
He's going to start a new student movement.
That's right. He
Yes, he did.
was not done.
And he left us with our hope
Right.
and with what we have to do.
Right.
And that's another thing, the trajectory of 95 years of doing this. And he did realize at about 90, I'm not going to see what I've been working for. I'm not going to see it. But I'm going to keep going.
Right.
And we might not see it.
I may not get to the mountaintop.
That's right.
I might not get there with you.
Yeah, but we will reach the promised land.
And the last section of the book, after King is killed, is called Still Going On. It has a double meaning. And it's called that, but that's what Martin Luther King said about Reverend Lawson the day before he died in his last speech. He said, Jim Lawson is fighting for the rights of his people, and he's still going on. And so we made that the last part. And it's a double meaning because everything, as you said, in L.A. and everything he encountered for 56 years later, it's still going on. But that's not a reason to stop, and it's not a reason not to fight or give up hope. And let's just say, in Jesse Jackson's memory, Keep hope alive.
Emily Yellin, John Lawson. Can't call him by his title, but give him a big round of applause. I am Michelle Miller. It's been my pleasure.